The silk nightgown slipped from Jasmine's trembling fingers as she stood frozen in the doorway of her own bedroom. Her husband Alexander was tangled in their expensive Egyptian cotton sheets with another woman, a blonde with perfect curves and red lipstick smeared across her mouth. The woman's laughter echoed through the room like broken glass, and Alexander's hands were places they should never be with anyone but his wife. "Alex, baby, I told you she'd never satisfy you like I can," the woman purred, running her manicured nails down his bare chest. Jasmine's world crumbled in that moment. Her breath caught in her throat as 18 months of what she thought was growing love revealed itself as nothing but lies. The shopping bags from their anniversary dinner fell from her numb hands, expensive jewelry scattering across the marble floor with tiny metallic sounds that seemed to echo forever. Alexander's head snapped up at the noise. For one terrible second, their eyes met across the room. His face showed shock, then something that looked almost like guilt, before hardening into the cold mask she remembered from their wedding day. "Jasmine." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You're home early." The casual way he said it, as if she had interrupted a business meeting instead of her marriage, sent ice through her veins. The blonde woman sat up, not even bothering to cover herself, and smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Oh, this must be the wife," she said, looking Jasmine up and down with obvious disdain. "Victoria Sterling. I'm sure Alex has mentioned me." He hadn't. In 18 months of marriage, Alexander had never once mentioned a Victoria Sterling. But the way he wouldn't meet Jasmine's eyes told her everything she needed to know about who this woman was and what she meant to him. Jasmine's legs felt like water. The room spun around her as memories of the past year and a half crashed through her mind. All those times Alexander had held her close during storms because she was afraid of thunder. The way he brought her coffee every morning exactly how she liked it. The gentle kisses on her forehead when he thought she was sleeping. The night 3 weeks ago when they made love so tenderly she was sure he felt the same growing feelings she did. All lies. All of it had been lies. "Get out," Alexander said quietly, his voice directed at her, not the other woman. Jasmine blinked, certain she had misheard. "What?" "I said get out. We need to talk, but not right now." His tone was businesslike, as if he was dismissing an employee from a meeting. The cruelty of it hit her like a physical blow. After catching him in their bed with another woman, he was the one ordering her to leave. Victoria's soft laughter filled the silence, and Jasmine felt something inside her chest break completely. Without a word, she turned and ran. Her bare feet slapped against the cold marble floors of their penthouse as she fled, Alexander's voice calling her name behind her. But she couldn't stop. If she stopped, she would fall apart completely, and she refused to give either of them the satisfaction of seeing her completely destroyed. The elevator seemed to take forever. When it finally opened, she threw herself inside and jabbed the button for the parking garage. Her whole body was shaking now and she could barely breathe. 18 months of building a life, of believing in something beautiful, shattered in the space of 5 minutes. Her car keys were still in her purse somehow. Her hands shook so badly she could barely start the engine. Rain had started falling outside, matching the tears that finally came streaming down her face. She had no idea where she was going. She just had to get away from that place, from him, from the image burned into her mind of her husband with another woman. Thunder rumbled overhead as she pulled out of the garage. The storm was getting worse, but she didn't care. Nothing could be worse than what she had just witnessed. The windshield wipers struggled against the heavy rain, and her tears made it even harder to see the road ahead. She thought about their wedding day 18 months ago. How handsome Alexander had looked in his black tuxedo, how his green eyes had seemed almost warm when he said his vows. But even then she had known it wasn't about love. Their marriage was a business arrangement between two powerful families, the Washingtons and the Blackwells. Her father needed Alexander's company to save his failing business empire. Alexander needed the respectability and connections that came with marrying into one of the city's oldest African-American families. Love was never supposed to be part of the deal. So why did it hurt so much to discover it truly meant nothing to him? The rain pounded harder against her windshield. Through her tears and the storm, she could barely make out the road ahead. Her phone was buzzing constantly, probably Alexander calling, but she ignored it. She never wanted to hear his voice again. Never wanted to see his face or smell his cologne or feel his hands on her skin. How had she been so stupid? How had she let herself believe that his gentleness meant something real? That the way he looked at her sometimes like she mattered was anything more than really good acting? Her mother had warned her this would happen. "Men like Alexander Blackwell don't change," she had said before the wedding. "They take what they want and discard the rest. Don't let yourself care too much, baby girl." But Jasmine had been so sure she could see something different in him. Some hint of the man he could be underneath all that arrogance and coldness. She thought she was slowly melting the ice around his heart. Instead, she had just been setting herself up for the most devastating heartbreak of her life. The storm was getting dangerous now. She should pull over, wait it out somewhere safe. But safety felt like an impossible concept right now. Nowhere felt safe when your whole world had just collapsed. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the empty road ahead. In that brief moment of brightness, she saw her life stretching out before her, returning to that penthouse, pretending everything was fine, continuing this fake marriage while dying inside a little more each day. The thought made her press harder on the gas pedal. She couldn't go back there. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. 2 years earlier, Jasmine Washington sat in her father's mahogany-paneled office, staring at the marriage contract spread across his massive desk. The legal document looked so clinical, so businesslike, that it was hard to believe it was meant to govern the rest of her life. "This is the only way, sweetheart," her father said softly, his weathered hands clasped together. At 65, Robert Washington looked every one of his years. The stress of watching his business empire crumble had aged him rapidly. "Blackwell Industries is our only hope. Without this merger we lose everything, the company, the house, your college fund for graduate school." Jasmine picked up the contract with trembling fingers. The terms were spelled out in black and white. A marriage of convenience between herself and Alexander Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries, in exchange for a complete buyout of Washington Holdings. The marriage would last a minimum of 2 years, during which time both parties would maintain the appearance of a happy couple for business and social purposes. "What about love, Daddy?" she whispered. "What about finding someone who actually cares about me?" Her father's eyes filled with pain. "Baby girl, I know this isn't what you dreamed of. I know you wanted the fairy tale wedding with a man who loved you. But sometimes life doesn't give us choices. Sometimes we have to sacrifice our dreams to save our family." Jasmine had met Alexander Blackwell exactly 3 times before this moment. Once at a charity gala where he barely acknowledged her existence. Once at a business dinner where he spoke to her for exactly 5 minutes about the weather. And once at a family barbecue where he spent the entire time on his phone, conducting business calls. He was undeniably handsome, tall with dark hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. But he was also cold, arrogant, and treated everyone around him like they existed solely for his convenience. The idea of spending 2 years married to him made her stomach turn. "He agreed to this?" she asked. "His grandfather's will requires him to be married by his 35th birthday or he loses control of the company," her father explained. "He needs a wife from a respectable family and he needs her fast. His birthday is in 6 months. So she was just a box to check off on Alexander Blackwell's to-do list. The knowledge stung, but it also made the situation clearer. This wasn't about her at all. She was simply the most convenient solution to his problem, just as he was the solution to her family's financial crisis. "The contract includes some protections for you," her father continued, flipping to another page. "Separate bedrooms. A generous monthly allowance. And if the marriage ends after the 2-year minimum, you'll receive a settlement that will set you up for life." Separate bedrooms. So even the pretense of a real marriage would only exist in public. In private they would be nothing more than roommates bound by a legal document. Jasmine closed her eyes and thought about her mother, who had died 5 years earlier from cancer. Medical bills from her treatment had started the financial troubles that led to this moment. Her mother had always told her to be strong, to never let anyone make her feel less than worthy of real love. "What would Mama think about this?" she asked quietly. Her father's voice broke a little. "Your mama would want you to save the family. But she'd also want you to know that this doesn't define your worth. This is just 2 years, Jasmine. After that, you'll be free to find real love." 2 years. It sounded like a lifetime, but maybe her father was right. Maybe she could think of it as a sacrifice for the greater good. Her younger brother Jerome was still in high school. Without this arrangement he wouldn't be able to go to college. Their family had built Washington Holdings over 3 generations. Was she really going to let it all disappear because she wanted a fairy tale romance? The next week she found herself sitting across from Alexander Blackwell in his gleaming corporate office, 60 floors above the city. He was reviewing the contract with the same attention he might give to any other business deal, occasionally making notes in the margins with an expensive pen. "I have some additional requirements," he said without looking up at her. Of course he did. Jasmine folded her hands in her lap and waited. "Public appearances will be required at least twice per week. Business dinners, charity events, social functions. You'll need to look the part, I'll provide a stylist and appropriate wardrobe. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing office supplies. You'll also need to learn about my business interests so you can make appropriate conversation. Anything else? Jasmine asked, trying to keep the sarcasm out of her voice. Finally he looked up at her. His green eyes were calculating, measuring her like she was a piece of furniture he was considering purchasing. I don't expect us to be friends, he said bluntly. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I have no interest in playing house or pretending this is something it's not. As long as we both understand that, we'll get along fine. The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a slap. She had known this wasn't about love, but hearing him spell out exactly how little she meant to him still hurt. Understood, she managed to say. Good. The wedding will be in 3 months. Small ceremony, immediate family only. We'll have a larger reception for business associates and friends. He made another note on the contract. I trust you can handle the planning details. Even her own wedding was becoming another item on her to-do list. Jasmine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. One more thing, Alexander said, his voice softening slightly. I know this isn't easy for you. I'm not trying to make it harder than it has to be. But I need you to understand that I don't do complicated emotional situations. Keep things simple between us and we'll both survive the next 2 years. It was the closest thing to kindness he had shown her, and somehow that made it worse. At least if he was completely heartless, she could hate him cleanly. This tiny glimpse of humanity made everything more confusing. 3 months later, Jasmine stood in front of a full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she had chosen for the ceremony. It was beautiful, elegant and classic, but it felt like a costume. This wasn't how she had imagined her wedding day as a little girl. Her best friend Tasha sat on the bed behind her, trying to hide her disapproval. It's not too late, Jazz. You could still call this off. Move to another city, start over somewhere else. And let my family lose everything? Let Jerome give up his dreams of college. Jasmine shook her head. I can't do that. But what about your dreams? Jasmine looked at herself in the mirror, 26 years old, about to marry a man who saw her as nothing more than a business transaction. Maybe some dreams aren't meant to come true. An hour later, she walked down the aisle of a small chapel toward Alexander Blackwell. He looked incredibly handsome in his black tuxedo, but his expression was completely unreadable. When she reached him, he took her hand with the same enthusiasm someone might show for a mandatory business meeting. The ceremony was brief and formal. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was quick and perfunctory, nothing more than what was required for the legal proceedings. There was no joy, no celebration, just the completion of a business deal. At the reception they played their parts perfectly. Alexander was attentive and charming, his hand never leaving the small of her back as they moved through the crowd of guests. To anyone watching they looked like a couple in love. But Jasmine could feel the emotional distance between them like a physical wall. When they finally arrived at Alexander's penthouse, now their shared home, the performance ended immediately. He loosened his tie and headed toward his study without a word. Alexander, she called after him. He paused but didn't turn around. Your room is down the hall. Second door on the left. The housekeeper stocked it with everything you should need. And that was it. Her wedding night ended with her husband disappearing into his office and closing the door, leaving her alone in a house that would never feel like home. That first night, lying in her beautiful but empty bedroom, Jasmine stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had gotten herself into. 2 years suddenly felt like an eternity. 6 months into their marriage, Jasmine woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the city. She had always hated storms, ever since she was a little girl. The penthouse felt enormous and empty in the darkness, and Alexander was away on another business trip. She pulled the covers over her head, trying to block out the lightning that kept flashing through her bedroom windows. But when another crash of thunder shook the building, she couldn't help the small whimper that escaped her lips. Jasmine? She sat up in surprise. Alexander was standing in her doorway, still wearing his business suit. He looked like he had just gotten home. I thought you were in Chicago until Friday, she said, her voice shaky from the storm. Flight got canceled. Weather's too bad. He stepped into her room and in the next flash of lightning she saw concern on his face. Are you okay? Another rumble of thunder made her flinch visibly. I hate storms, she admitted quietly. Always have. For a moment he just stood there and she expected him to make some polite comment and leave. Instead, he surprised her by sitting on the edge of her bed. "When I was 8, I got caught in a tornado while visiting my grandmother in Kansas," he said quietly. "Spent 3 hours in her storm cellar, listening to everything above us get destroyed. I know how storms can feel." It was the first personal thing he had ever shared with her. Jasmine found herself really looking at him for the first time in months. His dark hair was disheveled from traveling, his tie loose around his neck. He looked tired but also more human than she had ever seen him. Lightning lit up the sky again, followed immediately by thunder. Jasmine couldn't help but duck down under her blankets. "Come here," Alexander said softly. Before she could think about it, she found herself moving closer to him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her against his chest as the storm raged outside. "It's just noise," he murmured into her hair. "It can't hurt you." His heartbeat was steady against her cheek, and his cologne smelled like sandalwood and something uniquely him. For the first time since their wedding, she felt safe. When the next thunder crash came, she barely flinched. They stayed like that until the storm passed, neither of them speaking. When the thunder finally faded into the distance, Alexander gently pulled away. "Better?" he asked. Jasmine nodded, suddenly embarrassed. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "Get some sleep," he said, standing up. "We have the Morrison charity dinner tomorrow night." After he left, Jasmine lay awake for hours, replaying the feeling of being in his arms. It had been so unexpected, so gentle. Maybe there was more to Alexander Blackwell than the cold businessman he showed the world. The next morning, she woke to find a cup of coffee on her nightstand, prepared exactly how she liked it: 2 sugars, a splash of cream. Alexander was already gone, but the gesture made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't expected. At the charity dinner that evening, something between them had shifted. Alexander still played his part as the attentive husband, but now there were moments when his smiles seemed genuine. When he placed his hand on her back while they talked to other couples, it didn't feel like performance anymore. "You look beautiful tonight," he said as they danced to a slow song, and the way he said it made her believe he meant it. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up into his green eyes. For just a moment she could almost forget this was all pretend. Over the following weeks, small changes started happening. Alexander began joining her for breakfast instead of rushing straight to his office. He asked about her day when he came home from work. He brought her small gifts: a book by her favorite author, flowers from the farmer's market, a scarf in her favorite color. "You don't have to do this," she told him one evening when he brought home Chinese takeout from her favorite restaurant. "No one's watching us here." "I know," he said simply, and something in his voice made her heart skip. The night she got food poisoning from bad sushi, Alexander surprised her by coming home early from work to take care of her. He brought her soup and ginger tea, sat with her while she was sick, and even carried her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked weakly, leaning against him as he helped her back to bed. "Because you're my wife," he said quietly. "Fake marriage or not, I'm not going to let you suffer alone." It was such a simple statement, but it made her eyes fill with tears. When was the last time someone had taken care of her like this? Alexander noticed her tears and his expression softened. "Hey, you're going to be fine. It's just food poisoning." "It's not that," she whispered. "It's just, you're being so kind. I didn't expect." "You didn't expect me to care." It wasn't a question. Jasmine shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I know I'm not easy to be around," he said finally. "I know this situation isn't fair to you. But that doesn't mean I want you to be miserable." Something in his voice made her look up at him. "Are you miserable?" He considered the question seriously. "No," he said, sounding almost surprised. "I'm not." After that night, the walls between them started coming down more quickly. Alexander began telling her about his childhood, about the pressure from his grandfather to be perfect, about how he built his company from nothing after his parents died in a car accident when he was 25. Jasmine shared her own stories, about growing up as one of the only black families in their exclusive neighborhood, about watching her mother fight cancer, about her dreams of becoming a novelist someday. "Why don't you write now?" Alexander asked one evening as they sat together on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine. "When would I have time? Between all our social obligations and managing this household." "Make time," he said firmly. "You're brilliant, Jasmine. Don't waste that." The next day she found that he had converted a small room near the library into a writing office for her, complete with a new computer and all the supplies she could need. "Alexander, this is too much," she protested. "It's not enough," he said quietly. "I want you to be happy here. Really happy, not just pretending for the cameras. That night, she started writing her first novel. And when Alexander came home from work, instead of disappearing into his study, he asked to read what she had written. "It's not very good yet," she warned him. "Let me be the judge of that," he said, settling beside her on the couch. As he read, she watched his face, nervous about his reaction. When he finished the first chapter, he looked at her with something like wonder. "Jasmine, this is incredible. You have real talent." The pride in his voice made her cheeks warm. "You really think so?" "I know so." He leaned closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Don't let anyone ever tell you this isn't important. Your words matter." It was the moment she realized she was falling in love with her husband. The thought should have terrified her. This was supposed to be temporary, just business. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine care there, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Maybe, just maybe, he was falling for her too. A few weeks later, they attended Alexander's company Christmas party. Jasmine wore a stunning red dress that Alexander had chosen for her, and she felt beautiful and confident in a way she hadn't in years. "You're going to be the most gorgeous woman there," Alexander said as they rode the elevator up to the ballroom. "You have to say that. I'm your wife." "I don't have to say anything," he replied, his voice serious. "I say it because it's true." The party was elegant and sophisticated, filled with Alexander's business associates and their spouses. Jasmine had gotten better at these events over the months, learning to make small talk and navigate the complex social dynamics. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Alexander barely left her side, and when he looked at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. During a slow dance, he pulled her closer than usual, his hand warm against her back. "Thank you," he said quietly against her ear. "For what?" "For making this bearable. For making it more than I expected." She pulled back to look at him. "Alexander. I know this wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. "I know we agreed to keep things simple. What wasn't supposed to happen?" Instead of answering, he leaned down and kissed her. Not the quick, performative kisses they shared in public, but something real and deep and full of emotion. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "That," he whispered. "That wasn't supposed to happen." But neither of them pulled away. They stayed close together, swaying to the music, and Jasmine felt like her heart might burst from how full it was. Maybe their marriage had started as a business deal, but what was growing between them now was undeniably real. And for the first time since signing that contract, Jasmine allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could have something beautiful together. Victoria Sterling stood in the marble lobby of Blackwell Industries, her designer heels clicking against the floor as she approached the reception desk. 3 years in Paris had given her time to perfect her appearance. Her blonde hair was now styled in an elegant bob, her clothes were couture, and her smile was as sharp as a blade. "I'm here to see Alexander Blackwell," she announced to the receptionist, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied anything. The young woman behind the desk looked nervous. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Sterling?" "Victoria Sterling." "And no, I don't have an appointment." Her smile turned predatory. "But I'm quite certain he'll want to see me." 20 minutes later, Victoria was sitting in Alexander's office, watching him try to hide his shock at seeing her again. He looked good, success suited him. The boy she had known in college had grown into a powerful, confident man. It was a shame she had ever let him go. "Victoria." His voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Hello, darling," she purred, crossing her legs and enjoying the way his eyes followed the movement. "You look wonderful. Marriage clearly agrees with you." Alexander's jaw tightened at the mention of his marriage. "What are you doing here? I thought you were living in Paris." "I was. But I missed home. I missed old friends." She stood and walked closer to his desk, noting how he tensed when she approached. "I heard about your marriage. Congratulations." "Thank you." Victoria studied his face, looking for any sign of the man who had once been completely devoted to her. "It was quite a surprise, actually. I always thought when you got married, it would be to someone more suitable." "Jasmine is perfectly suitable." "Oh, I'm sure she's lovely. Very exotic." The word dripped with false sweetness. "Though I have to wonder, is it a real marriage, Alex? Or just another one of your business arrangements?" The fact that he didn't immediately deny it told her everything she needed to know. Victoria smiled wider. "I see. How very practical of you." She moved around his desk, placing her hand on his shoulder. You always were too smart to let emotions cloud your judgment. Alexander stood abruptly, moving away from her touch. Victoria, if you have something to say, say it. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Actually, I have a proposition for you. She settled back into her chair, confident now that she had read the situation correctly. I'm back in town permanently. I'm single, established, and very interested in rekindling our friendship. I'm married. To a woman you don't love, in a marriage that's purely for business. Victoria's voice turned gentle, almost sympathetic. Alex, darling, we both know what we had was real. What we could have again would be real. For just a moment, something flickered in Alexander's eyes, not love, but memory. Victoria had been his first serious relationship, the woman he had planned to marry before her father's job had taken her family to Europe. She had broken his heart when she chose Paris over him, and she could see that the wound had never fully healed. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. Some things don't change. Victoria stood and walked to him again, this time close enough that she could smell his cologne. Some feelings don't just disappear. She reached up and touched his face, and this time he didn't pull away immediately. I made a mistake, Alex. I should never have left you. I should never have chosen my career over what we had. Victoria. His voice was rough, uncertain. I know you remember, she whispered. I know you remember how good we were together. This time when she kissed him, he didn't stop her immediately. For just a few seconds he kissed her back, and Victoria's heart soared with triumph. When he finally pulled away, she could see the confusion in his eyes. I should go, she said softly, as if the kiss had affected her as much as it had him. But think about what I said, Alex. Think about what we could have again. She left him standing there, looking shaken and conflicted. It was exactly the reaction she had hoped for. Over the following weeks, Victoria made herself a constant presence in Alexander's world. She attended the same charity events, showed up at his business dinners, and made sure to run into him at his favorite restaurants. Always friendly, always beautiful, always reminding him of their shared past. She was careful not to push too hard too fast. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt about his marriage, subtle comments designed to make him question what he had with Jasmine. She's very young, isn't she? Victoria mentioned casually one evening when they ran into each other at a gallery opening. I suppose that's part of the appeal for men your age. Jasmine is only 4 years younger than me, Alexander replied stiffly. Of course. I just meant. Well, when you're dealing with someone so inexperienced, it must be difficult sometimes. She couldn't possibly understand the pressures of your world the way someone with more maturity might. Another time, at a business lunch where they were both present, she made sure to reference their college years. Remember that trip we took to Napa for your birthday? That little bed and breakfast where we stayed up all night talking about our dreams. Alexander's face went carefully blank, but Victoria caught the way his hands tightened around his coffee cup. Jasmine, sitting beside him, looked confused and hurt by the obvious intimacy of the memory. That was a long time ago, Alexander said. The best memories usually are, Victoria replied sweetly, then turned to Jasmine with a bright smile. You must hear so many stories about Alex's past. He had such an interesting life before he met you. The comment was designed to highlight how little time Alexander and Jasmine had known each other, how their relationship lacked the depth of history that she and Alexander shared. From the look on Jasmine's face, the barb hit its mark. Victoria's most effective weapon, however, was the truth. She knew things about Alexander that Jasmine didn't: his fears, his insecurities, the dreams he had shared with her in the quiet hours of their college nights together. She used this knowledge strategically, reminding him of conversations and moments that Jasmine couldn't possibly understand or share. You always said you wanted to build something lasting, she told him during a chance encounter at his office building. Something that would matter beyond just making money. Have you found that yet, Alex? The question clearly bothered him because Victoria knew it touched on his deepest fears, that despite all his success, his life lacked real meaning and purpose. My marriage gives my life meaning, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Does it? Or does it just give you the respectability your grandfathers will required? Victoria's voice was gentle, concerned rather than accusatory. There's nothing wrong with a practical arrangement, Alex. But don't confuse necessity with fulfillment. She could see her words taking root, creating cracks in whatever foundation Alexander and Jasmine had built together. It was working exactly as she had planned. The final phase of Victoria's strategy was the most dangerous. She began showing up at places where she knew Alexander would be alone. His gym, his favorite coffee shop, the park where he went to run when he was stressed. This is becoming a pattern, Alexander said one morning when he found her waiting by his car after his workout. Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something, Victoria replied lightly. Or maybe I just know you well enough to predict where you'll be. She had dressed carefully for this encounter, yoga pants that showed off her figure, a tank top that revealed just enough, her hair perfectly tousled as if she had just finished her own workout. She knew she looked good and she knew Alexander noticed. We need to talk about this, Victoria. About what you want from me. I want you to be happy, she said simply. Really happy, not just going through the motions. I am happy. Are you? She stepped closer, close enough that he would have to back away or stay close to her. Because you don't look happy, Alex. You look like a man who's settling for less than he deserves. This time when she kissed him, he kissed her back with real passion, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. This is wrong, he said, but he didn't let go of her. What's wrong is you pretending to be satisfied with a marriage that's just a business contract, Victoria whispered against his lips. What's wrong is you denying yourself real love because you think you have to honor some agreement that was never about your heart. She could see him wavering, see the walls he had built around his heart starting to crumble. But she also knew she couldn't push too hard right now. Alexander was a man who needed to feel like he was making his own choices, even when he was being carefully manipulated. I should go, she said softly, pulling away from him. I don't want to make things complicated for you. But as she walked away, she made sure to look back over her shoulder with just the right combination of longing and sadness. She wanted him to think about what he was giving up, what he was choosing to walk away from. That night, Victoria began the final phase of her plan. She had been patient for weeks, laying the groundwork, creating doubt and confusion in Alexander's mind about his marriage. Now it was time to force the issue. She knew from careful observation that Jasmine usually went shopping on Thursday afternoons. She also knew that Alexander typically worked late on Thursdays, but this week he had mentioned to a business associate within Victoria's hearing that he would be leaving early for a doctor's appointment. Victoria timed her arrival at the penthouse perfectly. The doorman recognized her from her previous visits to see Alexander and let her up without question. She had a key made weeks ago from an impression she had taken during one of her visits, so getting into the apartment was simple. She made herself comfortable in the master bedroom, the one room in the apartment that she knew would hurt Jasmine most to find her in. She arranged herself carefully on the bed, wearing only a silk robe that she left strategically open. She wanted to look like she belonged there, like this was natural and comfortable for her. When Alexander arrived home, she heard his key in the door and quickly called out, "In here, darling." The look of shock on his face when he entered the bedroom was exactly what she had expected. "Victoria, what the hell are you doing here? How did you get in? You gave me a key weeks ago, remember?" The lie came easily. "You said I should feel comfortable here whenever I needed to see you." Alexander's face was furious, but Victoria could also see confusion there. She had been careful over the past weeks to create so many small moments of intimacy that he might actually believe he had given her a key during one of their encounters. "I never gave you a key. Get out. Now." But Victoria had planned for his resistance. She stood up, letting the robe fall slightly open, and moved toward him with tears in her eyes. "Alex, please don't be angry with me. I couldn't stay away anymore. I love you. I've always loved you." Before he could respond, she threw her arms around him and kissed him desperately. This time she didn't hold back. This time she kissed him like a woman fighting for her life, pouring all her skill and passion into making him remember what they had once shared. For a moment, just a moment, he kissed her. But then he pulled away, his face hard. "This has to stop, Victoria. I'm married. To a woman you don't love." Victoria let her desperation show now, let him see how much she needed him. "To a woman you married for business reasons. Alex, what we have is real. What we've always had is real." She could see him weakening, see the conflict in his eyes. This was the moment she had been building toward for weeks. "Let me show you," she whispered, reaching for him again. "Let me remind you what real love feels like." This time when she kissed him, she didn't give him a chance to think or resist. She poured everything into that kiss, all her desperation, all her manipulation, all her genuine desire to have him back. And slowly, gradually, she felt him begin to respond. They were so caught up in the moment that neither of them heard the front door open. Neither of them heard Jasmine's footsteps in the hallway. Neither of them realized they had an audience until it was too late. Victoria had won. The trap was perfectly set, and in just a few moments, Jasmine Washington Blackwell would walk through that bedroom door and see her husband in another woman's arms. The carefully built relationship between Alexander and Jasmine would crumble in an instant, leaving Victoria free to reclaim the man who had always belonged to her. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The morning after Victoria's surprise appearance in Alexander's office, she woke up with a plan crystallizing in her mind. She had seen the way Alexander looked at her, had felt him kiss her back for those few precious seconds. But she had also seen how he pulled away, how he mentioned his wife with what sounded almost like genuine affection. That couldn't be allowed to continue. Victoria spent the next several days conducting research. She hired a private investigator to gather information about Jasmine's routine, her friends, her vulnerabilities. What she discovered was both useful and irritating. Jasmine Washington Blackwell was apparently well liked by everyone who knew her. The staff at Alexander's building spoke of her kindly. The wives of his business associates seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. Even the tabloid reporters who followed the city's elite couples had nothing but positive things to say about the Blackwell marriage. It was disgusting, really. Victoria had expected to find dirt, some evidence that Jasmine was using Alexander or making him miserable. Instead, she found a woman who seemed genuinely devoted to her husband and who had somehow earned his respect in return. Well, that would have to change. Victoria's first move was to plant seeds of doubt about Jasmine's motives. She began spreading carefully crafted rumors through the social circles she and Alexander moved in, nothing too obvious, just subtle suggestions that perhaps the young Mrs. Blackwell wasn't quite as innocent as she appeared. "I just think it's interesting how quickly she adapted to this lifestyle," Victoria mentioned to Margaret Ashford, one of the city's biggest gossips, over lunch at the country club. "I mean, going from a middle-class background to all this wealth, it must be quite an adjustment." "She seems to handle it well," Margaret replied carefully. "Oh, absolutely. Some people are just naturally gifted at adapting to new circumstances." Victoria's tone suggested there was something calculating about Jasmine's adaptation. "I suppose when the stakes are high enough, we all learn to play our parts convincingly." Margaret's eyes sharpened with interest. "What do you mean by that?" "Nothing specific, of course. I just meant that marriage to someone like Alexander requires a certain performance. Social expectations, business obligations. It's not easy to step into that world." Victoria paused delicately. "Though I suppose the financial benefits make it worthwhile." The conversation was carefully designed to plant the idea that Jasmine was motivated purely by money and social status, that her marriage to Alexander was nothing more than an opportunistic gold-digging scheme. Victoria knew Margaret would spread the gossip, and within a week, the rumor would be circulating through every important social circle in the city. But rumors weren't enough. Victoria needed something more direct, more devastating. She needed to create a situation where Alexander would be forced to choose between his past with her and his present with Jasmine, and she needed to make sure the choice was as difficult as possible for him. The opportunity came when she learned that Alexander and Jasmine were planning to attend the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, an event where Victoria had already planned to make an appearance. This time, however, she would be prepared. Victoria spent hours perfecting her appearance for the gala. She chose a stunning black gown that she knew was Alexander's favorite color, had her hair styled in the same way she used to wear it in college, and even wore the perfume she had worn during their relationship. Every detail was calculated to remind Alexander of what they had shared together. At the gala, Victoria watched Alexander and Jasmine from across the room. They looked happy together, too happy. Alexander's hand rested possessively on Jasmine's back as they talked to other couples, and when Jasmine laughed at something he said, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. It made Victoria's stomach turn. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Alexander was supposed to be going through the motions of a loveless marriage, not actually enjoying his wife's company. Victoria waited for the perfect moment to approach them. When Jasmine excused herself to go to the ladies' room, Victoria swooped in. "Alex, darling, you look wonderful tonight," she said, appearing at his elbow as if by magic. Alexander's body tensed when he saw her. "Victoria, I didn't know you were going to be here. I wouldn't miss it. You know how much I've always cared about children's charities." She moved closer, close enough that her perfume would be noticeable. "Dance with me? I don't think that's appropriate. It's just a dance, Alex. For old time's sake." Victoria's voice carried just a hint of hurt, as if his refusal wounded her. Besides, people are watching. It would be rude to refuse. She was right, and they both knew it. In their social circle, certain courtesies were expected, even between ex-lovers. Alexander reluctantly took her hand and led her onto the dance floor. "You look beautiful tonight," Victoria said as they began to move to the music. But then you always were the most handsome man in any room. Alexander remained silent, but Victoria could feel the tension in his body. She pressed closer, letting her hand rest against his chest. Do you remember the first time we danced together? She asked softly. At the Sigma Chi formal junior year. You were so nervous you stepped on my feet 3 times. Despite himself, Alexander's mouth curved in a slight smile at the memory. You wore that blue dress. You looked like a princess. I still have that dress, Victoria lied smoothly. I kept it because it reminded me of that night. Of how happy we were. She felt Alexander's hand tighten slightly on her waist, and her heart raced with triumph. She was getting to him, breaking through the walls he had built. That was a long time ago, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Some things are worth remembering, Victoria whispered. Some feelings are worth holding on to. When the song ended, Victoria made sure to linger in Alexander's arms for just a moment longer than necessary. She wanted anyone watching, including Jasmine, who had just returned from the ladies' room, to see the intimacy between them. Over the following weeks, Victoria escalated her campaign. She began showing up at places where she knew Alexander and Jasmine would be together, always with some plausible excuse for being there. She made sure to reference shared memories with Alexander in front of his wife, highlighting the depth of history between them that Jasmine could never compete with. Remember that weekend we spent at your family's cabin in Aspen? She asked during a chance encounter at a restaurant where Alexander and Jasmine were having dinner. When we got snowed in and spent the whole time talking about our future together? Jasmine's face went pale at the obvious intimacy of the memory, and Alexander looked distinctly uncomfortable. Victoria pretended not to notice the effect of her words. Those were such simple times, she continued wistfully, when we thought love was all that mattered. The comment was designed to imply that Alexander had loved her in a way he had never loved Jasmine, that what he had with his wife was a pale imitation of real love. From the stricken look on Jasmine's face, the message was received loud and clear. But Victoria's most effective weapon was her knowledge of Alexander's deepest insecurities. She knew that despite his success and confidence, he still carried scars from his parents' death, still worried that he wasn't capable of the kind of lasting love that his grandparents had shared. She used this knowledge ruthlessly. I've been thinking about what you said the other day, she told him during one of their carefully orchestrated encounters. About wanting to build something lasting. I think the reason we never worked out before wasn't because we didn't love each other enough. It was because we were too young to understand what real commitment meant. She let the implication hang in the air, that now they were older, wiser, more ready for the kind of mature love that could last forever. Meanwhile, his marriage to Jasmine could be painted as the mistake of a man who had settled for convenience rather than waiting for true love. Victoria, I need you to stop this, Alexander said finally, after weeks of her constant presence in his life. I'm married. I'm trying to build something with Jasmine. Are you building something? Or are you just fulfilling the terms of a contract? Victoria's voice was gentle, but her words were sharp. Alex, I know you care about her. But caring about someone isn't the same as being in love with them. She could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, the uncertainty that she had been carefully cultivating for weeks. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. I want you to be honest with yourself, Victoria replied. I want you to admit that what we had was real and what you have now is just settling. That night, Victoria put the final phase of her plan into motion. She had been patient, laying the groundwork for weeks, but now it was time to force the issue. She knew that Alexander was scheduled to be out of town on business, but she also knew from her careful observation that his trip had been cancelled at the last minute. Jasmine, however, wouldn't know about the cancellation. She would expect Alexander to be gone, which meant she would be alone in the penthouse when Victoria arrived for her final gambit. Victoria dressed carefully, a simple silk robe over expensive lingerie, her hair styled to look like she had just gotten out of bed. She wanted to look like a woman who belonged in Alexander's bedroom, who had every right to be there. Getting into the penthouse was easy, she had stolen Alexander's spare key weeks ago during one of their encounters. She made herself comfortable in the master bedroom, arranging the scene to look as compromising as possible. When Alexander arrived home early from his cancelled business trip, Victoria was ready for him. She called out to him as if she belonged there, as if this was a familiar routine. The shock on his face when he entered the bedroom was perfect. Victoria, what the hell are you doing here? How did you get in? Darling, don't be angry, she said, standing up and letting her robe fall open slightly. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to see you. Before he could respond, she was in his arms, kissing him with desperate passion. For a moment she felt him respond, felt the weeks of manipulation and confusion finally paying off. But then he pulled away, his face hard with anger and something that looked like self-disgust. "This has to stop," he said firmly. "I'm married to Jasmine And you what?" Victoria challenged. "Love her? We both know this marriage is just business, Alex. We both know what you have with her isn't real." She could see him wavering, see the carefully planted doubts doing their work. This was the moment she had been building toward for weeks. "Let me show you what real love feels like," she whispered, reaching for him again. This time when she kissed him, she put everything into it, all her desperation, all her skill, all her determination to win him back. And slowly, gradually, she felt his resistance crumbling. They were so lost in the moment that neither of them heard the front door open. Neither of them heard Jasmine's footsteps in the hallway. Neither of them realized their audience until it was too late. When Jasmine appeared in the doorway, her face white with shock and betrayal, Victoria felt a surge of vicious satisfaction. Finally, the perfect wife would see exactly what kind of man she had married. Finally, the fairy tale would crumble, leaving Victoria free to reclaim what had always been hers. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Jasmine drove through the storm with tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The image of Alexander and Victoria together was burned into her mind, the way they were kissing, the intimate way Victoria's hands moved across his chest, the look of passion on his face that she had thought was reserved only for her. She had been so stupid. So incredibly naive to think that their contract marriage had become something real. All those gentle moments, all those small kindnesses, all those nights when she thought she saw love in his eyes, it had all been an act. He had been playing a part while his real affections lay elsewhere. The rain pounded against her windshield, making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead. She should pull over, wait for the storm to pass, but she couldn't bear the thought of sitting still. She needed to keep moving, needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and that penthouse where her husband was probably making love to another woman. Her phone had been ringing constantly, Alexander's name appearing on the screen over and over again. She finally turned it off, unable to bear seeing his name or hearing his voice. What could he possibly say that would make this better? What explanation could there be for what she had witnessed? Thunder crashed overhead and Jasmine flinched instinctively. Even now, even heartbroken and betrayed, she still hated storms. But Alexander wouldn't be there to hold her through this one. He was probably holding Victoria instead, offering her the comfort and tenderness that Jasmine had foolishly believed was hers alone. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of her, illuminated only by brief flashes of lightning. She had no destination in mind, she just needed to drive, needed to escape the suffocating reality of her life. Where could she go? Back to her father's house, where she would have to explain how her marriage had fallen apart. To Tasha's apartment, where she would have to admit that everyone who had warned her about Alexander had been right. Another flash of lightning revealed a truck in the lane beside her, too close for comfort in the heavy rain. Jasmine tried to adjust her speed, but her vision was blurred by tears and the storm. She didn't see the patch of standing water until it was too late. The car hydroplaned, spinning sideways across the wet asphalt. Time seemed to slow as Jasmine fought to regain control, but the steering wheel felt useless in her hands. She saw the guardrail rushing toward her, saw the steep embankment beyond it, and knew with crystal clarity that she was about to die. In that moment, her last coherent thought wasn't about the betrayal or the pain. It was about Alexander, not the man who had just broken her heart, but the man who had held her during storms, who had created a writing space for her, who had looked at her sometimes like she was the most precious thing in his world. Had any of it been real? She would never know now. The impact when her car hit the guardrail was tremendous. Metal screamed against metal as the barrier gave way, and then she was airborne, flying through the darkness toward the rocky slope below. The car rolled 3 times before coming to rest against a cluster of trees, steam rising from the crumpled hood. Jasmine hung upside down in her seatbelt, blood running down her face from a gash on her forehead. Her left arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, and every breath sent sharp pains through her ribs. But she was alive. For now. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of sirens in the distance and the rain continuing to pound against what remained of her car windows. When Jasmine woke up, she was in a hospital bed surrounded by the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of medical equipment. Her head felt like it was wrapped in cotton, and when she tried to remember how she had gotten there, she found disturbing gaps in her memory. "You're awake," said a gentle voice beside her bed. A middle-aged black woman in scrubs smiled down at her with kind eyes. I'm Dr. Patricia Williams. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days. Jasmine's voice came out as a croak. What happened? You were in a car accident during that terrible storm on Thursday night. Your car went off Highway 285 and rolled down an embankment. You're very lucky to be alive. Thursday night. Jasmine tried to remember Thursday night, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. She could remember fragments: rain, driving, being upset about something, but the details slipped away every time she tried to focus on them. I can't remember, she said, panic creeping into her voice. I can't remember what happened. Dr. Williams sat down in the chair beside her bed. That's not uncommon with head injuries like yours. You have a moderate traumatic brain injury. The good news is that your other injuries, the broken arm, the cracked ribs, will heal completely. The memory issues may be temporary. Maybe. In some cases, memories return gradually over weeks or months. In others, certain periods may remain permanently blocked, especially if they were associated with severe emotional trauma. Dr. Williams consulted her chart. Can you tell me what you do remember? What's the last clear memory you have? Jasmine closed her eyes and tried to think. Images came in flashes: a beautiful penthouse apartment, formal dinner parties, a man with dark hair and green eyes. But when she tried to focus on the details, her head started to pound. I remember being married, she said slowly, to a man named Alexander. But I can't remember his face clearly or where we lived or... She paused, frustrated. I can't remember why I was driving in that storm. Your husband has been here every day, Dr. Williams said gently. He's been very worried about you. Would you like me to call him? Something cold twisted in Jasmine's stomach at the suggestion, though she couldn't say why. No, not yet. I need to remember more first. Over the following days, fragments of memory began to return, but they were confusing and contradictory. She remembered feeling safe in someone's arms during a thunderstorm, but she also remembered feeling betrayed and heartbroken. She remembered a beautiful blonde woman, but couldn't place her in the context of her life. She remembered signing important papers but couldn't recall what they were for. The doctors explained that her memories might return in a jumbled order, that her brain was still healing from the trauma. But Jasmine was beginning to suspect that some of the confusion came from emotional trauma rather than physical injury. On her 5th day in the hospital, a young woman with short natural hair and worried eyes came to visit her. Jazz? Oh my God, I've been so scared. The woman threw her arms around Jasmine carefully, mindful of her injuries. I'm Tasha, your best friend. Do you remember me? Jasmine studied the woman's face and slowly, some memories began to surface. Tasha. Yes, I remember you. You were at my wedding. That's right. Tasha sat down beside the bed, her expression cautious. What else do you remember about the wedding? It was small. Just family. Jasmine frowned, trying to recall more details. But something about it felt wrong. Like I was acting in a play. Tasha's face went carefully neutral. Jess, there's something you need to know about your marriage. Something you need to remember before Alexander gets here. What do you mean? Your marriage to Alexander? It wasn't a love match. It was arranged by your families for business reasons. A contract marriage to save your father's company. The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Suddenly, some of the contradictory memories began to make sense. The formal ceremony, the separate bedrooms, the feeling of playing a role. But I remember feeling like I loved him, Jasmine said quietly. You did fall in love with him, Tasha confirmed. Over the months you two grew closer. You thought he was falling in love with you too. But then. Tasha hesitated, clearly reluctant to continue. Then what? Then his ex-girlfriend came back. Victoria Sterling. She wanted him back, and she made it very clear that you were just a temporary inconvenience. Tasha took Jasmine's hand gently. The night of your accident, you came home early and found them together. In your bedroom. The memory hit Jasmine like a tsunami. Suddenly she could see it clearly, walking into her bedroom to find Alexander kissing another woman, the devastating realization that everything she thought they had built together was a lie, the desperate need to escape that had sent her driving into the storm. Oh God, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I remember now. I remember all of it. I'm sorry, honey. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the full weight of the betrayal wash over her again. But this time, something else came with the memory, a fierce determination not to let Alexander Blackwell hurt her again. He's been here every day? She asked. Every single day. The nurses say he barely leaves your room. He looks awful, like he hasn't slept or eaten properly since the accident. Jasmine felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. Probably worried about the scandal if his wife dies in a suspicious car accident. Jazz. Tasha hesitated again. There's something else. Victoria Sterling disappeared the night of your accident. No one has seen her since. Alexander claims he threw her out after you left, but what? But the timing is suspicious. She shows up, destroys your marriage, and then vanishes the same night you almost die? It feels like too much of a coincidence. Jasmine nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand that the night of her accident had been orchestrated, that Victoria had planned everything to destroy her marriage and reclaim Alexander. The question was whether Alexander had been a willing participant or another victim of Victoria's manipulation. Either way, it didn't matter now. The trust between them was broken, and Jasmine couldn't imagine ever rebuilding it. I need to get out of here, she said quietly. I need to disappear before Alexander realizes I remember everything. Where will you go? Jasmine thought about it for a moment. She had some money in a personal account that Alexander didn't know about, savings from before their marriage that she had kept separate. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to start over somewhere far away. I don't know yet. But I can't stay here. I can't face him, Tasha. I can't pretend to forgive him or try to make this work. It's over. That night, while the hospital staff thought she was sleeping, Jasmine carefully removed her and monitoring equipment. Her head still pounded and her broken arm was in a cast, but she was mobile enough to walk. She had Tasha bring her some clothes and what cash she could gather. When the sun rose, Jasmine Washington Blackwell walked out of the hospital and disappeared into the city, leaving behind her old life and the man who had broken her heart. She had no idea that she was carrying Alexander's child, the one secret that would change everything. 2 months after disappearing from the hospital, Jasmine sat in a small clinic in Portland, Oregon, staring at the pregnancy test results in disbelief. The doctor, a kind middle-aged woman named Dr. Martinez, had confirmed what the home test had already told her: she was 8 weeks pregnant. This is unexpected, Jasmine said quietly, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. Are you okay? Do you have support? A partner? Dr. Martinez asked gently. Jasmine almost laughed at the irony. Yes, she had a partner, a husband who was probably still searching for her, who had no idea she was carrying his child. But Alexander was also the man who had betrayed her with his ex-girlfriend, the man whose deception had sent her fleeing into a storm that nearly killed her. It's complicated, she said finally. The father? We're not together anymore. Dr. Martinez nodded understandingly. What would you like to do? You have options, and whatever you decide, I'll support you. Jasmine closed her eyes and tried to think clearly. She was living under a false name, Sarah Johnson, in a tiny studio apartment in Portland's Pearl District. She had a job waitressing at a small cafe that paid cash under the table. Her savings were running low, and she was still dealing with occasional headaches and memory gaps from her brain injury. Having a baby would complicate everything. But as she sat there thinking about it, she realized that the tiny life growing inside her felt like hope. For the first time since walking out of that hospital, she felt like she had something to live for beyond just surviving. I want to keep the baby, she said firmly. Are you prepared for single motherhood? It's not easy, even under the best circumstances. Jasmine thought about her own mother, who had fought cancer with grace and strength, who had raised her children to be resilient and independent. My mother raised me to be strong. I can do this. Over the following months, Jasmine built a new life in Portland. She found a better job at a bookstore that offered health insurance and didn't ask too many questions about her past. The owner, Mrs. Chin, was a grandmother who took one look at Jasmine's growing belly and decided to become her unofficial protector. You need to eat more, Mrs. Chin would say, bringing Jasmine homemade soup during her lunch breaks. Baby needs nutrition. Jasmine rented a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood where young families lived. She bought baby clothes at thrift stores and assembled a crib she found at a garage sale. She attended prenatal classes at the community center, where she was the only single mother in a room full of happy couples. Sometimes, late at night, she would wonder what Alexander was doing. Was he still with Victoria? Had he divorced her in absentia? Did he ever think about the wife who had vanished from his life? But then the baby would kick, reminding her that she had someone else to think about now. She never called her father or Tasha, though she sometimes drafted letters she never sent. They would be worried sick, but contacting them would risk Alexander finding her. She couldn't take that chance, not when she was finally building something that belonged entirely to her. When her son was born on a snowy February morning, Jasmine held him in her arms and felt complete for the first time in months. He was perfect, dark hair like his father's, but his eyes were hers, dark brown and full of curiosity. "What's his name?" the nurse asked. Jasmine looked down at her son and smiled. "Elijah. Elijah Johnson." She didn't give him Alexander's last name. This child belonged to her new life, not her old one. Elijah was an easy baby, rarely crying and sleeping through the night by 3 months old. Jasmine managed to work part-time at the bookstore while Mrs. Chen watched him, and in the evenings she would read to him from the children's books she brought home. When Elijah was 6 months old, Jasmine started writing again. She had been too heartbroken and traumatized after the accident to even think about her novel, but holding her son gave her new inspiration. She wrote about second chances, about women who found strength they didn't know they had, about love that came when you least expected it. She submitted her manuscript to agents under her assumed name and was thrilled when one of them offered to represent her. The book sold to a small press, and though the advance wasn't large, it was enough to give Jasmine hope that she could build a career as a writer. Life wasn't easy, money was always tight, and she was exhausted from juggling work, motherhood, and writing. But she was happy in a way she had never been during her marriage. She was making her own choices, building her own future, raising her son on her own terms. When Elijah turned 1, Jasmine threw him a small party in their apartment. Mrs. Chin came along with a few other friends she had made in Portland. As she watched her son laugh and play with his toys, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had made it through the hardest year and they were both thriving. But late that night, after everyone had gone home and Elijah was asleep in his crib, Jasmine found herself looking through the few photos she had kept from her old life. There was one of her and Alexander at a charity dinner, both of them smiling at the camera. She remembered that night. It was one of the evenings when she had truly believed he was falling in love with her. She touched his face in the photograph, wondering if he would ever know about his son. Elijah deserved to know his father, but Alexander had made his choice that night with Victoria. He had chosen his past over his future, and Jasmine couldn't risk her son's heart being broken the way hers had been. By the time Elijah was 18 months old, Jasmine's second book had been accepted for publication, and she was working on a third. Her writing was gaining recognition, and she was even invited to speak at a writers' conference in Seattle. "You should go," Mrs. Chin urged her. "I'll watch Elijah. It's good for career." Jasmine hesitated. She rarely left Portland, afraid that traveling might somehow lead to being discovered. But the conference was an important opportunity, and Seattle was only 3 hours away. "Just for the weekend," she agreed finally. At the conference, Jasmine met other writers, attended panels, and felt connected to a creative community for the first time in years. She was walking through downtown Seattle, enjoying a rare moment of solitude, when she saw a familiar face in the crowd. Tasha was standing outside a Starbucks talking on her phone. For a moment, Jasmine froze, torn between the desire to run to her best friend and the fear of being discovered. But before she could decide, Tasha looked up and their eyes met across the busy street. The recognition was instant and mutual. Tasha's face went white with shock and she dropped her phone. Jasmine turned and walked quickly in the other direction, but she could hear Tasha calling her name behind her. That night, back in her hotel room, Jasmine packed her bags and took the first bus back to Portland. She knew that seeing Tasha meant her time hiding was probably over. Her best friend would tell people she was alive, and eventually that information would reach Alexander. But when she got home and saw Elijah playing happily in Mrs. Chen's arms, she realized she was no longer afraid. She had built a good life for herself and her son. She was a published author with a growing career. She was strong and independent and capable of protecting what mattered most to her. If Alexander found her, so be it. She was no longer the heartbroken woman who had fled into a storm. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman who knew her own worth. Let him come. She was ready for whatever happened next. Alexander Blackwell stood in his empty penthouse, staring at the bedroom where his marriage had fallen apart 2 years ago. The room had been redecorated completely, new furniture, new paint, new everything, but he could still see Jasmine's face in his mind, the devastation in her eyes when she found him with Victoria. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that had become habitual over the past 2 years of searching for his wife. The private investigators he had hired had found nothing. It was as if Jasmine Washington Blackwell had simply vanished from the face of the earth. His phone rang and he answered it immediately, hoping it might be news. "Mr. Blackwell? This is Detective Morrison with the Portland Police Department. We may have a lead on your wife's whereabouts." Alexander's heart raced. What kind of lead? A woman matching her description was spotted at a writers' conference in Seattle last weekend. One of the attendees thought she recognized her from the missing person flyers we've been circulating. Seattle? Alexander was already reaching for his car keys. Do you have any more details? Not much, but we're investigating. I'll call you as soon as we know more. After hanging up, Alexander sat down heavily in his chair. Seattle was only a few hours from Portland. If Jasmine was in the Pacific Northwest, it meant she had been living just a few states away this entire time, building a life without him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent 2 years traveling across the country, following false leads from Miami to Chicago to Los Angeles, and she had been relatively close by all along. Alexander's mind went back to that terrible night when everything fell apart. After Jasmine fled into the storm, he had thrown Victoria out of his apartment, finally seeing her manipulation for what it was. Victoria had orchestrated the entire scenario, timing her appearance to coincide with Jasmine's early return home, positioning herself in their bedroom to cause maximum damage. "You're making a mistake, Alex," Victoria had said as he practically dragged her to the door. "She'll never forgive you for this. But I will. I'm the one who really loves you. Get out," he had said, his voice deadly quiet. "If I ever see you again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Victoria had left that night and disappeared completely. Alexander later learned that she had fled to Europe, apparently realizing that her plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of winning him back, she had destroyed any chance of a relationship with him forever. But the damage was already done. By the time Alexander went looking for Jasmine, her car had been found crashed at the bottom of an embankment. The police said she was lucky to be alive, that she had been taken to the hospital with serious injuries. When Alexander arrived at the hospital, he found Jasmine unconscious with a head injury. The doctors weren't sure when she would wake up or what her condition would be when she did. So he waited. He sat by her bedside for 3 days, holding her hand and praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. When she finally woke up, she didn't remember the betrayal. The head injury had caused memory loss, and she couldn't recall the events leading up to the accident. Alexander saw it as a gift, a chance to start over and prove to her that what they had was real. But then Tasha arrived and everything changed. Alexander had been getting coffee when Jasmine's best friend arrived for a visit. When he returned, he found Jasmine's bed empty and Tasha gone. The nurses said Mrs. Blackwell had checked herself out against medical advice. It wasn't until hours later that Alexander realized Tasha must have told Jasmine the truth about that night. His wife had remembered everything and chosen to disappear rather than face him. For the first 6 months after Jasmine vanished, Alexander had been consumed with guilt and self-loathing. He hired the best private investigators money could buy, put up missing person posters across the country, and even offered a substantial reward for information leading to her whereabouts. But as time passed with no results, Alexander began to understand that Jasmine didn't want to be found. She had made a conscious choice to leave him and start a new life somewhere else. The realization was devastating, but it also forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself and their marriage. He had fallen in love with Jasmine, really deeply in love, but he had never told her. He had been too proud, too afraid of making himself vulnerable, too convinced that admitting his feelings would somehow diminish his power in the relationship. Even worse, he had allowed Victoria to manipulate him because part of him still carried the old wounds from their college relationship. When Victoria returned and began her campaign to win him back, she exploited his insecurities and fears, making him question everything he had built with Jasmine. The kiss Victoria had initiated in their bedroom wasn't consensual on his part. She had caught him off guard and he had been trying to push her away when Jasmine walked in. But he understood why it had looked like betrayal to his wife. The context didn't matter when the image was so damning. Alexander threw himself into work for the first year after Jasmine disappeared, building his company into an even larger empire. But success felt hollow without someone to share it with. He attended social events alone, declined invitations to dinner parties, and avoided anything that reminded him of the life he had lost. His friends and business associates assumed he was getting divorced and moving on with his life. Alexander never corrected them, but he also never filed for divorce. Legally, he and Jasmine were still married, and he intended to keep it that way until he could find her and explain what had really happened that night. The breakthrough came when Tasha was spotted in Seattle. Alexander's private investigator had been monitoring her phone records and social media accounts, hoping she might lead them to Jasmine. When Tasha made an unexpected trip to Seattle and then immediately returned to the city, they knew they were onto something. She was only there for 6 hours, the investigator reported. Just long enough for a quick meeting with someone. My guess is your wife contacted her. Alexander felt hope stir in his chest for the first time in months. If Jasmine had reached out to Tasha, it meant she might be ready to come home. Or at least ready to talk. Focus the search on the Portland-Seattle area, Alexander instructed. She's somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. What he didn't know was that Jasmine hadn't contacted Tasha at all. The meeting in Seattle had been a chance encounter that left both women shaken, Tasha because she finally knew her best friend was alive, and Jasmine because she realized her hiding was probably over. When Tasha returned from Seattle, she was faced with an impossible choice. She could keep Jasmine's secret and let her friend continue living her new life in peace. Or she could tell Alexander where to find his wife and give him a chance to explain what had really happened that night. Tasha had never liked Alexander. She thought he was too cold, too controlling, too willing to treat Jasmine like a business asset rather than a woman worthy of love. But she had also seen how devastated he had been after Jasmine disappeared. Whatever his faults, his grief seemed genuine. More importantly, Tasha had learned something that Jasmine didn't know. Through her connections in the legal community, she had discovered that Victoria Sterling had been investigated for fraud in connection with a business deal that went bad right before she returned to the city. The timing suggested that Victoria's pursuit of Alexander might have been motivated by financial desperation rather than love. If that was true, then Alexander had been as much a victim of Victoria's manipulation as Jasmine had been. Maybe he deserved a chance to tell his side of the story. 3 weeks after the Seattle encounter, Tasha made her decision. She called Alexander's office and asked to meet with him. "I know where Jasmine is," she said without preamble when they met at a neutral location. "But before I tell you anything, I need to hear the truth about what happened that night." Alexander told her everything: Victoria's manipulation campaign, the stolen key, the setup in the bedroom, how he had been trying to get Victoria to leave when Jasmine arrived. He explained about Victoria's financial troubles and her history of using men to solve her problems. "Do you love her?" Tasha asked bluntly. "Do you really love Jasmine, or was she just convenient for you?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I love her more than I've ever loved anyone," he said finally. "I was an idiot for not telling her that every day. I was a coward for letting my pride get in the way of being honest about my feelings. And if she doesn't want to come back to you? If she's happy where she is? Then I'll respect that," Alexander said quietly. "But I need her to know the truth about that night. I need her to know that what we had was real, even if she can't forgive me for how it ended." Tasha studied his face for a long time, looking for any sign of deception. Finally she nodded. "She's in Portland, Oregon. She's been there for over 2 years and she's—" Tasha hesitated. "She's not the same person who left here, Alexander. She's stronger now, more independent. Don't expect her to just fall back into your arms." "I understand. And there's something else you should know," Tasha said carefully. "Something that might change everything." "What?" Tasha took a deep breath. "You have a son." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. "What?" "She was pregnant when she left. She gave birth about 18 months ago. His name is Elijah." Alexander sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. He had a son. A child he had never met, who had been living across the country while Alexander searched desperately for his mother. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she thought you had chosen Victoria over her," Tasha said gently. "Because she believed your marriage was just a business arrangement that you had grown tired of. She was protecting herself and her child from more heartbreak." That night, Alexander booked a flight to Portland. He didn't know what he would say to Jasmine when he found her, or whether she would even agree to see him. But he had to try. He had to find his wife and son and somehow convince them that they belonged together as a family. The search was finally over. Now the real work would begin. It was a sunny Saturday morning in Portland's Laurelhurst Park when Alexander Blackwell's world changed forever. He had been searching the city for 3 days, following the leads his private investigator had developed, visiting coffee shops and bookstores where Jasmine might work. The trail had gone cold, and he was beginning to think she had already moved on again. He decided to take a break in the park, sitting on a bench overlooking the duck pond while he tried to figure out his next move. That's when he saw her. Jasmine was pushing a toddler on the swings about 50 yards away, laughing as the little boy squealed with delight. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, styled in a natural cut that framed her face beautifully. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked relaxed and happy in a way he had rarely seen during their marriage. But it was definitely her. His heart recognized her before his mind fully processed what he was seeing. And the child. Alexander's breath caught in his throat as he watched the little boy. Even from a distance he could see the resemblance. The dark hair, the way he held his head, the gestures that reminded Alexander of himself at that age. This was his son. His and Jasmine's son. Alexander stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. He had found them. After 2 years of searching, they were right there in front of him, living a life he had never been part of. As he watched, Jasmine lifted the boy out of the swing and set him down on the grass. He immediately toddled toward the duck pond, and she followed, keeping a careful eye on him while he pointed excitedly at the water. Alexander started walking toward them, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he was going to say. He just knew he couldn't let this moment pass. He was about 20 feet away when Jasmine looked up and saw him. The color drained from her face, and for a moment she just stared at him in shock. Then she quickly scooped up the toddler and took several steps backward, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. Jasmine. Alexander stopped walking, holding up his hands to show he meant no threat. Please don't run. She clutched the child protectively against her chest, and Alexander could see that she was trembling. The little boy looked curiously at this stranger who had made his mother upset, his dark brown eyes Jasmine's eyes, studying Alexander with the frank assessment of a 2-year-old. How did you find me? Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper. Tasha saw you in Seattle. She told me where you were. Alexander took a careful step closer. I'm not here to hurt you or take you back against your will. I need to explain what really happened that night. I remember what happened, Jasmine said, her voice stronger now. I remember exactly what I saw. You saw what Victoria wanted you to see, Alexander said desperately. It was all planned, Jasmine. She set the whole thing up to destroy our marriage. The little boy started to fuss, uncomfortable with the tension he could sense between the adults. Jasmine bounced him gently, murmuring soothing words while never taking her eyes off Alexander. This is Elijah, she said quietly. Your son. Hearing it confirmed out loud hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He's beautiful, he managed to say. He looks like you. He has your eyes. Sometimes when he concentrates, he makes the same expression you used to make when you were working. The casual mention of their shared past, the implication that she had thought about him over the past 2 years, gave Alexander hope. Can we sit down? He asked. Please? I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to tell you what really happened. I'd like to meet our son properly. Jasmine hesitated for a long moment, then walked to a nearby bench. She sat down but kept Elijah on her lap, a barrier between herself and Alexander. Alexander sat down carefully on the other end of the bench, maintaining distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. Victoria was in financial trouble, he began. She had been investigated for fraud and was facing bankruptcy. When she came back to town, it wasn't because she loved me, it was because she needed someone to solve her money problems. That doesn't change what I saw, Jasmine said quietly. She had stolen a key to our apartment. She timed her arrival for when you were supposed to be out shopping. When I came home and found her there, I was trying to get her to leave. Alexander's voice was earnest, desperate for her to believe him. She threw herself at me just as you walked in. I wasn't kissing her back, Jasmine. I was trying to push her away. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you let her manipulate you for weeks before that night. You were confused about your feelings, weren't you? Part of you was tempted by what she was offering. Alexander closed his eyes, hating how accurately she had read the situation. Yes, he admitted. She knew exactly which buttons to push, which insecurities to exploit. But Jasmine, I never wanted to be with her. Even when I was confused, even when she was making me doubt everything, I never stopped wanting to be with you. But you never told me you loved me, Jasmine said, and there was pain in her voice. In 18 months of marriage you never once said you loved me. How was I supposed to know what you really felt? Alexander felt like his heart was breaking. Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid that admitting I loved you would make me vulnerable, would give you power over me that you could use to hurt me. So instead you hurt me. Yes. And I'm sorrier about that than you'll ever know. Elijah had grown restless during their conversation and was squirming to get down. Jasmine set him on the grass beside the bench, where he immediately became fascinated with a line of ants marching across the sidewalk. He's walking already? Alexander asked, desperate to focus on something positive. He started at 11 months. He's very active. Jasmine's voice softened when she talked about their son. He loves books and music. And he's fearless, Always climbing on everything. Like you were as a child. Jasmine looked surprised. How did you know that? Your father told me stories at our wedding reception. About how you used to climb trees and give your parents heart attacks. Alexander smiled at the memory. I stored away everything anyone told me about you. I wanted to know everything. They watched Elijah play for a few minutes in comfortable silence. Then Jasmine spoke again. I've built a good life here, Alexander. I have a job I love, friends who care about me. I'm a published author now, did you know that? Alexander's face lit up with genuine pride. You finished your novel? I've published 2 books, actually. I write under a different name, but they've done well. Jasmine's voice carried a confidence that hadn't been there during their marriage. I'm not the same person who left Seattle 2 years ago. I'm stronger now. More independent. I can see that. And I'm proud of you. Alexander meant it completely. You deserve all the success in the world. Then why can't you just let us be happy here? Why did you have to find us? The question hung in the air between them. Alexander looked at his son, who was now attempting to feed grass to an uninterested squirrel, and tried to find the right words. Because I love you, he said simply. Because I've loved you since about 3 months into our marriage and I've been too proud and too scared to admit it. Because I want the chance to be a real husband to you and a father to our son. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. It's too late, Alexander. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. Is it? Are you telling me you feel nothing when you look at me? Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. What I feel doesn't matter. I can't risk getting hurt again. And I won't risk Elijah getting hurt either. I would never hurt him. Not intentionally. But what happens when the next Victoria Sterling shows up? What happens when you get bored with playing house and remember that you never wanted a real marriage in the first place? Alexander stood up and knelt in front of the bench, close enough to touch her hands but not quite doing it. There will never be another Victoria Sterling, he said intensely. What I felt for her was the ghost of an old relationship, something she used against me because I was too stupid to recognize it. What I feel for you is real, Jasmine. It's the most real thing in my life. Tears were flowing freely down Jasmine's face now. I loved you so much, she whispered. I loved you more than I had ever loved anyone. And when I saw you with her, it nearly destroyed me. I know. And I will spend the rest of my life making up for that if you'll let me. Before Jasmine could respond, Elijah came toddling back over to them, apparently having decided the squirrel was boring. He looked curiously at Alexander, who was still kneeling on the ground. Mama, Elijah said, pointing at Alexander. Who dat? Jasmine looked down at her son, then back at Alexander. For a moment, the 3 of them formed a perfect triangle, a family unit that felt natural despite everything that had happened. This is. Jasmine hesitated, then made a decision that would change all their lives. This is your daddy, baby. Elijah studied Alexander with serious eyes, then suddenly broke into a huge grin and launched himself at his father. Alexander caught him instinctively, holding his son for the first time, and felt tears streaming down his own face. Hi, buddy, he whispered against Elijah's soft hair. I've been looking for you for a long time. Elijah pulled back to look at Alexander's face, then patted his cheek with one small hand. Dada, he said experimentally as if trying out the word. That's right, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your dada. Jasmine watched the interaction between father and son with a mixture of joy and terror. She could see how natural they were together, how much Elijah needed his father in his life. But she was also terrified of opening her heart again, of risking the safe, secure life she had built for herself and her son. This doesn't fix everything, she said quietly. I know, Alexander replied, still holding Elijah. But it's a start, isn't it? As they sat in the park that day watching their son play and talking carefully around the huge emotions between them, Jasmine began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be repaired after all. 3 months after their reunion in the park, Jasmine stood in the kitchen of her Portland apartment, watching Alexander help Elijah build a tower out of blocks. Their son had taken to his father immediately, and now, Dada, was one of his favorite words. Alexander had been visiting every weekend, flying back and forth between Seattle and Portland while they all tried to figure out what came next. Higher, Dada. Elijah commanded, clapping his hands as Alexander carefully placed another block on top of their precarious construction. I think it's high enough, buddy, Alexander said, laughing as the tower swayed dangerously. We don't want it to fall on your head. But Elijah was determined, and he reached up to add one more block himself. The entire structure came tumbling down, blocks scattering across the living room floor. Instead of crying, Elijah burst into delighted giggles and immediately started gathering blocks to build again. "He's definitely got your determination," Jasmine said, bringing Alexander a cup of coffee. "And your optimism," Alexander replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "When things fall down, he just starts over. No fear, no hesitation." They had been taking things slowly over the past 3 months. Alexander was staying in a hotel when he visited, giving Jasmine space to adjust to having him back in her life. They were like cautious strangers learning to trust each other again, but with the added complication of co-parenting a toddler who had no understanding of their complicated history. "I've been thinking," Alexander said as they watched Elijah start on a new tower, "about what you said that first day in the park. About building a life here." Jasmine looked at him curiously. "What about it?" "I want to move here. To Portland. I want to be close to you and Elijah, not just a weekend visitor." Jasmine felt her heart skip, but she kept her voice careful. "What about your company? Your life in Seattle? I can run the company from anywhere. Most of my business is done over video calls anyway." Alexander set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "Jasmine, I don't want a life that doesn't include you and our son. I want us to be a family." "We are a family," Jasmine said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we have to be married. We can co-parent without." "Without what?" "Without admitting that we still love each other." The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had directly addressed the feelings that still existed despite everything that had happened. "Alexander," Jasmine began, but he interrupted her gently. "I know you're scared. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for. But I also know that when you look at me you feel something. And when I hold you, like when Elijah fell last week and we both reached for him at the same time, there's still something there." He was right and they both knew it. The attraction between them had never faded, and over the past 3 months, Jasmine had found herself remembering all the good times from their marriage. The way Alexander would bring her coffee in the morning, the gentle way he had held her during storms, the pride in his voice when he talked about her writing. "Feeling something and trusting someone are two different things," Jasmine said. "Then let me earn your trust back. Let me prove to you that what we have is worth fighting for." Before Jasmine could respond, Elijah came running over with a book in his hands. "Story, Mama. Story." It was their evening routine. After dinner, they would all sit together on the couch while Jasmine read to Elijah. Alexander had joined them for this ritual during his visits, and it had become one of Jasmine's favorite parts of the day. They settled on the couch with Elijah between them and Jasmine opened the picture book. But instead of the familiar children's story, she found a handwritten letter tucked inside the pages. "Alexander, what is this?" "Read it," he said softly. "Please." Jasmine unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "My dearest Jasmine, I know that words on paper can't undo the hurt I've caused, but I need you to know the truth about what you mean to me. I fell in love with you on a Tuesday morning in October, 4 months after we were married. You were sitting at the kitchen counter in your pajamas, working on your novel with your hair in a messy bun and your forehead wrinkled in concentration. You were completely absorbed in your story, and you looked so beautiful and so brilliantly alive that I felt like I couldn't breathe. That was the moment I knew our marriage had become real for me. That was when I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life watching you write stories and seeing you get excited about plot twists and character development. But I was too scared to tell you. I was afraid that admitting I loved you would make me vulnerable, would give you the power to hurt me the way I had been hurt before. So I kept it to myself and I let my silence create distance between us. When Victoria came back, she exploited every fear and insecurity I had. She made me doubt what we had built together, made me question whether your feelings for me were real. But even when I was most confused, even when she was making me doubt everything else, I never stopped loving you. The night you found us together was the worst night of my life, not because you caught us, but because I realized I had lost the most important thing in my world through my own cowardice and stupidity. I have spent the last 2 years learning to live without you, and it has taught me that nothing else matters if I don't have your love. Money, success, power, none of it means anything if I can't share it with you. I love you, Jasmine. I love your strength and your kindness and your brilliant mind. I love the way you make everyone around you feel special and valued. I love watching you be a mother to our son, seeing how naturally love and patience come to you. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I'm asking for the chance to prove to you every day that you and Elijah are the most important things in my life. I'm asking for the chance to be the husband and father I should have been from the beginning. I want to marry you again, Jasmine. Not because of contracts or business arrangements, but because I choose you. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Because I want to grow old with you and watch our son become a man and maybe give him some brothers and sisters along the way. If you'll have me, I promise to love you openly and honestly for the rest of my life. I promise to never let pride or fear come between us again. I promise to be worthy of the incredible gift of your love. All my love, always, Alexander. By the time Jasmine finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. Elijah had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from his day of playing. Alexander, she whispered. I meant every word, he said softly. I love you, Jasmine. I have loved you for years and I will love you until the day I die. Jasmine looked down at their sleeping son, then back at the man who had broken her heart and then spent 2 years trying to find the pieces. She thought about the life she had built in Portland, the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. But she also thought about the family they could be together, the love that had never really died despite everything that had happened. I'm terrified, she admitted. So am I, Alexander said. But I think the best things in life are worth being terrified for. Jasmine set the letter aside and carefully transferred Elijah to his crib in the bedroom. When she came back, Alexander was still sitting on the couch, waiting for her answer. If we do this, she said slowly, if we try again, it has to be different. No more games, no more walls, no more protecting ourselves from each other. I agree completely. And I'm not moving back to Seattle. I like my life here. If you want to be with us, you come to us. Already planned on it. I found a house in Laurelhurst actually, near the park where we met again. It has a big backyard for Elijah and a beautiful office space where you could write. Jasmine smiled despite herself. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? Since the day I found you in that park, Alexander admitted. I've been planning our whole life together. Jasmine walked over to the couch and sat down beside him, close enough that their knees were touching. I love you too, she said quietly. I never stopped loving you even when I hated you. Even when I was trying my hardest to forget you. Alexander reached out and touched her face gently, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Does that mean you'll marry me again? For real this time? Are you asking? Alexander slid off the couch and onto one knee, taking her hands in his. Jasmine Washington, will you marry me? Not because of business or contracts or family obligations, but because I love you more than life itself and I want to spend forever proving it to you. Jasmine looked down at this man who had been her husband, her heartbreak, and now her hope for the future. She thought about 2-year-old Elijah sleeping in the next room, about the family they could build together, about the love that had survived betrayal and separation and 2 years of uncertainty. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. When Alexander kissed her, it felt like coming home. It felt like the end of a long journey and the beginning of an adventure. It felt like love, real, honest, unguarded love that had been worth fighting for. 6 months later, they were married again in a small ceremony in Portland's Rose Garden, with Elijah toddling down the aisle as their ring bearer and Tasha as Jasmine's maid of honor. This time when they said their vows, they meant every word. This time when they promised to love each other in sickness and health, for better and worse, they knew exactly what those words could cost. And this time, when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was full of joy and hope and the promise of a future built on real love rather than convenient arrangements. Alexander kept his promise to move to Portland, where they bought the house in Laurelhurst with the big backyard and the beautiful office. Jasmine continued writing, publishing more books that gained national recognition. Alexander ran his company remotely and discovered that he actually preferred the slower pace of life in Portland. When Elijah turned 3, they gave him a baby sister named Hope. And when Hope turned 2, they added a second son, Michael, to their family. Sometimes, when Jasmine was watching Alexander play with their children in the backyard or when he brought her coffee while she was writing, she would remember that terrible night when she thought her world was ending. She would think about how close they had come to losing everything, and she would feel grateful for the second chance they had been given. Love, she had learned, wasn't just about the fairy tale beginning. It was about fighting for each other when things got difficult. It was about choosing to trust again after being hurt. It was about building something real together, piece by piece, day by day. And in the end, their love story was even more beautiful because it had been tested and proven strong enough to survive anything life could throw at them. They had found their way back to each other, and this time they were never letting go.